Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what is clearly a massive scam, a scam on nuclear proportions, of how people from just one village or town in India, the subcontinent in India, all were able to come in at the same time and buy up entire streets and blocks of apartments all at the same time. Now, in a market economy where everyone has access to buy those apartments, and they could be randomly distributed amongst buyers, and so, but it entirely bought up, not just by the same ethnic group, but an ethnic group from the same town. So this is not market forces or anything at work. This is clearly rigged and orchestrated and set up. So how do they actually do this? So let me just add a bit of wider context here. The Australian government, completely controlled by the globalist cabal, has really ramped up the mass migration recently, as indeed as has been ramped up in the United States and Europe and Britain and so on. So it's clearly coordinated and dictated by the globalist cabal. But the migration rate to Australia is up to like 500,000 people a year coming in, mostly from the Indian subcontinent. And they're not needed here, and there's not jobs have to be created for them, and so on. So it's a crazy state of affairs. But again, the globalists demand it, and the globalist-controlled government does it. Western governments now are no longer sovereign and haven't been for some time. They're just little fetch and carry flunkies working for the globalists. So anyway, 500,000 coming. The population of Australia has only just recently turned 27 million. And they're getting 500,000 coming in a year. The insanity of it. So anyway, how do these things happen? I've always marveled at how they can bring this many people in, and the deception and duplicity and the treachery and the underhanded games required to do it. But there's a street in I wouldn't call it an outer suburban area. There was a time when I suppose it was outer suburban, but it's sort of the outer edge of the middle distance suburbs. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. And when I was a kid, there were single story, homes that were built there in the 1920s, 1930s, that sort of thing. They were there was still a lot of sort of minor agricultural sort of type stuff there. You still have people be grazing a few cows and sheep and growing their growing the vegetables and whatnot. That's how it was when I was anyway. No longer. And the particular street I noticed a year or so ago had been had the whole street had really all the single story houses have been leveled, and there was high rise apartment blocks going. I think it was 9 apartment blocks I counted, and they're high rise, so they're 70, 80 apartments per block. And they're not huge and spacious. I mean, they're not cheap either, interestingly, but so they were being built, and that was it. I didn't really think much about it. Anyway, I was there recently, and so I remembered it. So instead of walking down the street that I needed to go to a particular business that I was going to buy something from, I took a sort of longer trip around and walked down the street where these apartment blocks had gone up. Now, the only people coming in and out of the apartment blocks were Indians, were wearing the local dress, walking and behaving like they really just got off the plane or the boat. They all seemed to have a young child in tow and another one on the way. And there was like a little, a park or playing area there. There was only Indians there. And so as I was walking along, it seemed like it was very much an Indian gig. So, and now on the other side of the road, or just as you turn the corner, there's they've still got the old sort of houses that were there from built 100 years ago, and there was an elderly lady in the front yard, printing the roses. So I struck up a conversation with her, and I mentioned it, and she said there's only Indians that live there. There's no, there were no Indians there and they all arrived en masse at the same time, which is certainly how it looked. So here's the scenario. So these apartments are finished roughly the same time. So 700 odd apartments come up for sale. They're theoretically to be sold to anybody who wants to buy them. It's not a bad location. There's quite a large shopping centre nearby with grocery stores and all that sort of thing. Walking distance. There's also walking distance to a bit of a decent walk maybe, but walking distance to a train, public transport train main interchange station. So this was the station. So wherever you want to go around Sydney, this would be an interchange where you could go to there, and you wouldn't have to keep on changing trains multiple times or anything. So it's quite a good location in that regard, and so well serviced with transport and shops. So according to this old lady, and she, given how she was, I think she kept a close eye on the neighbourhood. But she said there's only Indians live in these apartment blocks and there's no one else. And she made sort of observations, suggest she's been watching closely. There's not even any Chinese, or there's no white people, or there's only Indians. Now, how was it that 700 odd apartments came up for sale at about the same time, and all of them sold to Indians? Now, if I listened to the dialect as I was walking by, it was the same dialect. Now, I'm not an expert on Indian languages or anything, but it was clearly the same dialect, and given the interaction I've had with Indians in business and so on, at least I was able to pick that much up. Also, the type of dress and clothing and this sort of thing. So they come from the same area of India. She says, for the dialogue she's had with them, that they even come from the same town, and they're very pleased with themselves that somehow a few thousand people from the same town in India were able to transplant themselves completely from India into Australia in just one pass, in a single pass, one move, and they all were. Now, how are they able to buy all those apartments up at the same? How are they? I mean, you can't do that. No, I mean, you don't know who's going to go. Does it mean that every other buyer who wasn't Indian was refused and not allowed to buy a property there? Was that? I mean, did that happen? I mean, seriously? Was it that the property developers, who, as I understand it, were not Indian, were they bribed to make sure that only Indians were allowed to buy? Was there some other forces at work here? Because that takes a lot of work to line up all those doors. It's okay, no one's allowed to. These apartment blocks we're building here are only for Indians from this town in India, and only they and only they are allowed to buy it. No one else is allowed to buy it. No one, any other buyer comes along, tell them to get lost, and only. I mean, how does that even happen? Now, some of these people don't look particularly wealthy. They're not the Brahmin upper caste sort of people here. So I don't believe that they have the money or access. So that means loans were being arranged, finance was all arranged, which means there's other forces now, additional forces behind the scenes who are doing all this. But how do they actually do that? Transplant the whole village from India into, in this case, Sydney, Australia, and just pick up a whole bunch of people from this place and dump them into the other, and it's a whole seamless sort of thing. Now, how many of these people were needed? Do they have the skills, or what do they have? When they do speak English, it's heavily accented, so English isn't their first language. So I don't know on what basis were they brought to Australia. This strikes me as a massive scam, and that there are all sorts of strings and forces at work behind the scenes that are facilitating this. And there is nothing organic or natural about this at a social level, at an employment level, at a financial level, at a property development level. The whole thing's pretty set up. Now, this is very much an Indian thing, and I don't know how they do it. There's a house in a few years ago in the area. There's a house that was bought by some Indians from Punjab, or supposedly. I don't think they actually bought it. I think other people own it and they've been installed there. And then the house behind them, you know, in the sort of the street behind the house behind them, come for sale. And another Indian bought this, but again from the same region in the same town. And that struck me as a little odd. I mean, how would you coordinate that? Then recently, the house to the left of the first buyer, of the first Indian to appear, came up for sale, and bingo, another Indian group are installed in there as well. And again, they've just arrived. Where do they, you know, how do they, where does the money come from? How is that arranged? Do they go to the owner of the property, who is an Anglo Australian, say, you can't see, you know, we'll pay you extra. We'll give you another $20,000 under the table, but you can only sell to another Indian. I mean, how is this scam pulled off? And it clearly is a scam. I mean, there's no question of that. So now 3 people from the same town or village in India, the Punjab region, now live right next to each other as a 3. Now, again, that's not natural forces. How do they pull this off? Clearly, there's something very untoward going on. But here you go. This is how it's done. And now, this is not how things used to work in the West. You know, there were natural forces that would, as in market forces, would apply, and who could afford this and any, you know, and that sort of thing. So it created a sort of random effect. There's no random effect here. This is planned down to minute detail as to you will live in this house there, and this sort of thing. And who's planning that? Exactly who's behind this? You've been with Tacit Estate, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.